Mike Henderson here again with the second part of using Novel Factory software. Now, one of the places that you start, if we look at their, if you look at their roadmap, the first thing you do is you come up with a premise. And what that means is they tell you here, it should be possible to express the premise or the central idea of your story in a single sentence. And they go through some discussion of that, which you can do on your own. They give some examples. When aliens attack Earth in the year 2050, how can John the plumber, even try to save the human race when the traitorous government manages to turn him into a space goat and lock him into jail? Now, they do it a lot as a question. You can do that, I suppose. I don't like it that way, so that's one of the things I disagree with, the way they do things, but you can easily rephrase this as not a question, but it doesn't make too much difference. The idea is you have to think about your story and have an idea enough about what the story is. You hear the bells. I live in Venice, so it must be, so it's 11 o'clock. For some reason, they ring at 11. Probably because we advanced the clocks. I used to ring it sometime earlier. I don't know. In any case, I digress. Deep in medieval England, can King Edward Braveheart bring peace to warring lords, while his jealous younger brother is plotting to have him declared incompetent and overthrown? All right. So mine is a space truck driver must save himself when his hyperspace engine fails millions of light years from the nearest planet and his robot companion is trying to kill him. The story is called The Void. For some reason this file is Void too. I don't know why, but so that is the first thing we have to do is we've got to have enough of an idea of what the story is to try to frame it in a sentence. Whether it be a question or not doesn't make too much difference. This is just sort of for your own reference. So what do they do next? After the premise is the skeleton, which is what this is. And their skeleton, the default view is the 3-act structure. So we'll look at that again, and it says, you've got the basic premise, which means you got the beginning of the story. It's time to give it a few more bones. So it goes into a discussion, in this particular case, of the 3-act structure. Now, a lot of people, maybe we should talk about that right now. A lot of people believe, especially when they first start out, that you sit down and you write the novel and whatever happens, happens. Well, that may be how you sort of unearth what the novel is about and what does happen and what characters are in it and so forth. But that only results in a first draft and maybe some ideas. In the end, the novel must have a structure, something along the lines of this. So you need to reconcile yourself to that. If you read any book, for example, Stephen King doesn't plan his novels, but his novels follow this rule because for one thing, he has an intuitive sense of how a story should be structured. And for another thing, he probably has people who can help him edit this thing. So he comes up with, your story must have a structure like this. Now there are variants of it. So there is the 3-act structure and the 4-act structure and the 5-act and so forth. I think people have varied it all the way up to like 8 acts or something, but it's still the same idea in the end. Really, the first act does, it says here, introduces the protagonist, the call to action. And as it says here, that this is working off of the hero's journey and the mono myth. If you don't know what those things are, research them, and there are books on them that would be very helpful. But this is sort of introduction to the protagonist world. You always start your story you show the protagonist with some exceptions. But generally you start the story with the protagonist in his ordinary world doing what he does. There's a call to action, so something happens and somebody asks him to do something. So if you think of the first Star Wars movie, for example, which is really the one that I'm most familiar with, we start out with Luke Skywalker doing what he does. So he's working on his aunt and uncle's farm. He's got to try to get some robots, and so this is where he ends up finding this message to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Then he's got to find Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he does that, and the call to action is that Obi-Wan says, "Look, I need you to help me fight the evil empire." And there's more to it than that. There's a call to action. There's usually a refusal of the call. So Luke says, "No, I can't. My aunt and uncle rely on me to do my work on the farm." And then he discovers later that his aunt and uncle have been killed, and so he accepts the call to action. They cross the first threshold, which literally often is walking through a doorway, and in this case, the first threshold is walking into the doorway of that crazy bar scene, and so forth. So this part takes up about 25% of the story. Act 2, so crossing the threshold leads us into Act 2, and this takes up about 50% of the story. And then Act 3 takes up the last 25% of the story. And I don't want to beat that to death too much, but that is what you need to do. And they go into some detail here about, not excruciating detail, but they give you, a little bit of more information. And then there's a little chart here that shows the hero's journey in several blockbusters. So Harry Potter, everybody knows this. Philosopher's Stone, his aunt and uncle and his cousin, his invitation to Hogwarts is the call to action. Crossing the threshold is a training to Hogwarts, and so forth. So take a look at that. But the point to this is they have a large story skeleton framework, and we will